Thanks for tuning in. Um, and thank you so much to Dr. Nab for setting all of this up and asking me to be part of it. Super flattering because there's some heavy hitters that have done presentations. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Hess. I own my own business called Saxocentric. I specialize in saxophone repair and restoration, and I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. So I need to hurry up with this so I can go bowling and get my hair cut later. Just kidding. So before I get into my actual clinic, I posted a couple weeks ago to prepare everyone that I'm also doing a little giveaway today. So anyone who has liked my Saxocentric Facebook page has automatically been entered into this contest. I've got everyone's names in this app on my browser that's going to randomly select names. So the first prize I'd like to give away is a Saxocentric t-shirt. So I'm going to just quickly spin and see who gets that. And I'm sorry if I butcher your name. And that's going to go to Reese Bergen. I actually know Reese. I hope you're well in Texas. I'll ship that to you. So he's going to get a t-shirt. Key Leaves, which we'll talk about a bit in my presentation, also donated or offered several products to give away to a few different people. So I'm going to do drawings for that real quick as well. The first one I'll do is for their gap cap, which is like an end plug that is adjustable so your horn stays snug in the case. So this is for alto saxophone. So the winner of the gap cap is going to be, I feel like Wheel of Fortune, Sophie Lockhart. All right, so Sophie, Keeley's will send you that directly. I'll get in touch with you to get your contact. All right, next Keeley's product giveaway is going to be a set of the Key Leaves key props, and I'll show you how to use those later. So winner of those is going to be Wally West, who's in North Carolina. So I'll have to send those off to him. Okay. Oops. And last thing is going to be a Key Leaves spit sponge, which I'll also talk about in a little bit. That's going to go to Hijiri in New Mexico. I overhauled her horn a while ago. So I will ship that off to you, Hijiri. All right, so I'm done with my little giveaway. And now to get into the good stuff. So I'm going to share with you some basic care and maintenance things that you should and can do to your saxophone by yourself. I will also first, though, like to go through and talk about how the saxophone is manufactured so that you better understand why you may have certain issues and why they might sort of creep in over time the more you play your horn. So I think that's kind of nice for you to learn about if you don't already know how a saxophone's manufactured. So I'll just kind of in a nutshell go through how it's made. So, and this is sort of a general overview for pretty much every saxophone the way it's manufactured. I'm sure there are differences between brands and their factories. So it starts out sheets of brass and they cut that into their appropriate shapes and they make the body tube portion, okay? And then the bow and the bell Some factories hand make the bells. I know that like Selmer is a combination mechanical and handmade process for the bell and the bow. The body tube itself is made mostly a mechanical process, okay? Once they have those sort of base parts made, the body tube will go onto a special jig and the tone holes are drilled. So they have a specific mandrel for each model and size of saxophone, and the cone of brass slides onto that, and a technician will drill in where the tone holes need to go, and then a separate process is where the tone hole is drawn out from the body tube itself. So that's how we get the chimney shape. And I've got this naked saxophone to show you. Hopefully you can see some of the sort of foundation a little bit better. From there, the posts and the ribs, which this one doesn't actually have ribs, which are like a long strip of metal that can connect multiple posts. Those are attached to the horn. Sometimes it's got a little tack weld or just soldering on there. The keys are fabricated. It's a combination mechanical and technician process. So the cup where your pad is installed is punched out of a sheet of brass, and the rest of the key is sort of hand assembled by technicians most of the time, especially in a higher end factory. Okay, all of the parts are then buffed up and either lacquered, like this horn, or plated. So some of you may have silver plated or gold plated horns. That's when that process happens. And then they are engraved. Many factories have engravers that do this by hand. Selmer, I know, has started using more of a mechanical process. In fact, it may be all computerized at this point. So if you have a Jubilee horn, you've noticed the engraving is different than previous models. It's very nice and intricate. And then from there, it starts to come together. The pads are installed by a technician, and they begin to assemble the saxophone so that it hopefully plays. Sorry. The part of the problems begin to develop there at the assembly portion because they generally use very little glue behind the pads. And when they go to seat the pads, they can't necessarily always heat up the key cup and sort of float the pad, which is my ideal goal when I'm seating a pad and adjusting one. I want to float it on a bed of shellac. And if you don't have a lot of glue, you don't have a lot of choices. So because of the lack of adhesive, they often have to bend keys around or even go as far as hitting things or tapping them into place so that they do actually seal, which the bending and the tapping or hitting can lead to other things becoming misaligned or bent. And it's sort of already, I mean, we know it's not a perfect instrument anyway, but it becomes even sort of, it starts life sort of rough. And because that final setup process is done by a person and different people, it can lead to a lot of inconsistency. So that's why maybe when you buy a new horn, you need to try out who knows how many, and maybe they're all different. Maybe they're all subtly different. So when I overhaul a horn, I do my best to correct all those fundamental issues. And like I said, oftentimes because of the assembly process, the body can get bent, posts are misaligned, all of that's corrected in a really good overhaul. And the key work is fit snugly amongst itself in the posts. All the key cups become level. It's probably gonna be hard for you to see, but this is a low C key off of an old busher. Okay, well, first of all, this horn's old. It's coming up on 100 years old. But even back then, the process was very similar, the factory manufacturing process. So, but this is a key cup. Maybe you can hear it rocking back and forth on this block. That's an unlevel key cup. And if you have a pad going in an unlevel key cup and then coming down on what's likely an unlevel tone hole, you're going to have leaks develop as that pad sort of settles because the metal's not really going to change. So that's part of the reason your things are going to fall out of adjustment. Okay, so that's in a nutshell how a saxophone's made. And like I said, it's sort of, I'm sure it differs from brand to brand and factory to factory. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. If there's something as I go, maybe I can try to snag those, but I'll definitely get to them at the end. I'll have time for questions. So if you have questions about anything, including me or how I got to this place in my life, I'm happy to answer. I'm an open book, so ask away. All right, so now that you know that your saxophone's already imperfect, unless you've had it overhauled really well, let's talk about some basic care and maintenance things that you can and should do. And if you are doing these, I hope that you're relaying this to your students if you're teaching, and doing it on a regular basis so that you're taking the best care of your horn possible. So some of these are very basic things, and then we'll get into a little bit higher level things that you can do or try. But I think it's good to review even the most basic things to take care of your instrument. So first thing I have on my list is swab your horn after you're done playing it, okay? I see even pros who don't swab, and that's going to lead to problems down the road. So the swab is meant to remove moisture from the bore of the instrument because, as we know, as you play, moisture condensation builds up inside of there, and it's just sitting in there if you don't take it out or try to remove it. So I personally like these silk swabs. This is an Ann Hodge silk swab. It's super big. It's got a nice long string on it, and it's got a weighted end that's covered with rubber. There's no bristly thing. It goes through the horn very easily. This one, even as big as it is, goes through my neck and my mouthpiece without any problems. And I know it's not going to scratch my horn, and I'm confident that it's going to get out as much moisture as possible. So you wanna try to get out that moisture. Speaking of, I don't like those pad saver shove it things, those big fuzzy bristly things, because even if you do swab and put it in there, there's still, no matter what, there's still going to be little bits of moisture sitting in your horn. And if you have a furry thing living in your instrument, that moisture is going to be attracted to that, and it's going to want to stay there. So you're effectively just putting like a sponge inside of your saxophone, and it's going to sit there and until you play again. Okay, so it's like I said, you can't really get out every single drop of moisture, even swabbing, but you can swab to help, and that's where the first and second Key Leaves products come in handy, okay? So the key leaves, key props, which many of you may already have and use, they're super great. It's such a simple thing, but it's really effective. So the way these work, in case you don't know, you use them and one goes under your low C sharp, okay, which is a key that's sprung closed, and the other reaches around and goes under your low E flat key. Hopefully you can see that okay. And when you crack open the C sharp, your G sharp opens up because that's all connected here. If you have a modern horn or a horn with tabs back there, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So essentially, they're leaving those keys open and the air is flowing through and any moisture that wants to sit there is allowed to escape. We all know that those keys tend to be some of the first ones that get sticky. The low E flat pad tends to be one of the first pads to go bad on every saxophone or get really noisy. So this is a really simple but effective way to help combat stickiness and pad noise, and also prolong the pad life. Also, the spit sponge, which I don't have out, but in this packet here, is really nice to sort of get out any excess moisture that's in there. So after you're done playing and you've swabbed and everything, you can use it and go in and just sort of spot absorb any leftover moisture in there. Okay. So what else? What else do you need to do to take care of your horn? You should always use an end plug of sorts, okay? On alto and tenor especially, most of the time, the octave stem extends above the receiver of your instrument. And if you don't put the cap in there, there's a good chance that stem is going to get caught on something. I see it a lot with student models or students' horns. It gets caught and then it gets like ripped and away and bent, and it messes up your entire octave mechanism. So an end plug is really handy and useful. When you put it in, I generally don't recommend tightening the screw down, okay? If you crank that way down, over time, it can misshape your receiver, and then you may one day go to put your neck into the receiver and it won't go in because your receiver is misshapen. So if you feel the need to tighten that screw at all, just tighten it down until it stops. Don't tighten it like you would install the neck because to avoid any unwanted damage. If you care about the finish of your horn, and some people submitted questions early about how do I clean my horn, which we'll talk about in a bit. But generally, if you care about the lacquer or the plating, and when you're done playing, you wanna wipe it off. Okay, our fingers and bodies emit oils and different chemicals. We're all different, so your horn may have a lot of corrosion and buildup, and you're like, why is this happening to me? It may just be your body chemistry. But anything you touch on the horn, if you care about it, you want to try to get those oils and different chemicals off. And I just use a soft, non-abrasive cloth to wipe it down. And we'll talk about some other ways that you can clean it maybe a little more thoroughly in a little bit. Okay. Oh, note about the end plug. Sorry, where'd that gap cap go? The key leaves gap cap is essentially an end plug, except it's adjustable, and it also allows air to sort of escape out the top of the instrument. So it's hard to see, but it screws at the top. So if you have any play in your case, when you put the horn in there, you can adjust it so that the play goes away. Speaking of, if your horn is loose in the case, you want to try to limit the amount that it can move within the case, so that when you pick it up or fling it over your back, or you're walking across campus, your horn's not moving all over the place in the case. That can throw it out of adjustment, especially on a lower quality instrument. The metal tends to be weaker and it's more likely to bend. So you want to try to limit any movement in the case. I recommend using like some clean socks or an old t-shirt and just, carefully putting it around your horn in the case, so that it's not shifting as you walk. Also, I don't generally recommend cases that roll, okay, or have wheels. I know a lot of berry cases will have wheels for ease of transport, but I don't recommend them if you can avoid it. And specifically, I mean, if you're going to be walking on a street, on a sidewalk that might have bumps in it, you want to try to avoid any sort of abrupt motion with your instrument so that you don't, again, knock it out of alignment or something. In an airport, sure, roll away, ride it down the aisle, I don't care. But in general, I say let's avoid those, because if your horn moves at all, it may knock it out of adjustment. Okay, I'm just got my list here so I stay sort of on track. Okay, laying the horn down. And these, again, are basic things, but I just like to review them. And maybe you don't know. Maybe you've never known. Or maybe I'll give you something to think about. When I lay my alto or a tenor down on a flat surface, first of all, you want to make sure you are laying it on a flat, solid surface so that it doesn't risk moving on its own. But with alto and tenor, I usually lay them, well, almost always, with the guards or the front of the horn down, okay? So let me take these key leaves out real quick. So by doing it this way, you've got the low B flat guard, the low C guard, even the bell rim, and then maybe the post up here. You've got all of that stuff supporting the weight of the horn. If you lay it this way, you have, well, first of all, your D palm key is probably going to stay cracked open. And I see dents under that key all the time. And if you laid it down hard enough or quickly enough, it may dent the body of the instrument. And also, depending on your horn, the left-hand pinky cluster may protrude beyond the bell a little bit. And if you lay it down this way, that's going to be the first thing to hit the surface. And that's going to potentially knock the bell keys and other things out of alignment. And we all know that playing low notes is already hard enough, right? So we don't want any little mishaps. So I like to lay horns this way. It depends. I sort of just look and see how it's going to be the most stable. And soprano's the same, especially a straight soprano. They tend to want to roll whatever way they want, but I lay it down however I feel it's most stable. So just be mindful of that kind of stuff. You can prevent a lot of issues just by being mindful of that. And this sounds maybe super simple, but in general, you want to take and be as careful as possible with this thing. Many of us invest thousands of dollars in our saxophones, if not more. And generally, the higher quality, higher end brands are going to hold up better. So, if you're teaching and your students have a lesser quality instrument, just reiterate to them, hey, you've got to take really good care of this. Be gentle. It's fragile. A lot of the mechanics are very complex, and you don't want to spend a lot of time in the repair shop or a lot of money. So just sort of revisit those very basic things with your students and maybe even yourself. Maybe you forget sometimes. Okay, so I can't really see the chat from here because my computer's way far away. I'm going to keep going unless there are specific questions about what I just talked about. So let's talk about some more, a little bit more advanced care and possibly DIY repair stuff that you can try doing on your own. And I'll start more simple and then get gradually a little bit more complex. So first thing that most people want to know and struggle with are sticky pads, right? Who's had sticky pads? Yes, everyone probably raised their hand. So I use a couple of methods. Okay, sticky pads. First, I usually want to try to clean it off. Okay, so to do that, I use lemon pledge and Q-tips, clean Q-tips, okay? And I'm gonna try to clean the pad and the tone hole. So I like to spray just a little bit of pledge on a clean surface. I don't know if you can see that. And then just dab the Q-tip in a little bit of pledge. And then whichever pad you're gonna target, we'll say C sharp on my horn, even though it's not sticky. But you want to go in there with the Q-tip and just sort of gently, you can scrub on the pad. You're targeting mostly the pad seat, which is the ring that forms from the tone hole. And then you also want to scrub at the tone hole itself because that's where the buildup starts. So you do that and you may see, you likely will see some kind of dirt or debris on your Q-tip, okay? And there you go, you've cleaned your pad off. Most of the time that fixes the stickiness, but I find that it can become more sticky sounding. It may not actually stick, but it might have that kissy sound that we all hate, I hope. So to combat that, there's a couple of things. You can use the spit sponge, which this also will help clean it. So you could, that's why this is so awesome because you can just keep it in your case. Like you don't want to carry around a can of pledge. That would be sort of weird. So the spit sponge is really great because it's going to clean off your pads as well. It absorbs any moisture, and you can use it and run it through over the tone hole and the pad, and help alleviate any sort of sticking on the road. But if you're like right now, we're all stuck at home, and if you haven't been able to get your horn serviced recently, you may want to sit down and clean your pads and see what comes off. If it's been a while, it might be a lot of stuff. So once I do the pledge thing, I will usually go over with a powder of some kind. And some people are really against this powder stuff. I use it very, very minimally and very carefully, because if you get too much, it can sort of build up and get sort of cakey. And we don't want that, because then it's going to sit there and sort of eat away at your pads. So if you use a powder of some sort, use very, very little. I use this one that comes in a little jar, and then I will use a separate little strip of cloth to sort of embed the powder. So again, I put a little bit on a clean surface and just sort of dab my cloth strip in there, and then I even work off a lot of the excess. And we're going to do a similar thing, but you go to your targeted key and you just sort of run it through here. And you're just leaving like a very thin layer of the powder on the pad and the tone hole, and it's going to eliminate stickiness and that kissy sound, which I know many of us loathe. It can be very distracting, especially if your horn's quiet otherwise. Also, Yamaha makes powder embedded paper, like cigarette paper, which is essentially the same thing. So that's handy to keep around with you. Or sometimes just plain paper or cigarette paper can help temporarily, but I think the most effective part of this whole step process is cleaning it off. Because if you don't clean it off, you're sort of just putting a Band-Aid over it with a powder or the paper. So that may only work for a little while. I will say if you do all of this or some of it and the pad just keeps sticking, or you every day are finding it stuck, that pad probably needs to be replaced. So that's when you probably need to visit your friendly technician, and or if you're brave enough, you can try it yourself. But yeah, if you're finding a pad just will not cooperate and continues to be sticky, it probably needs to go. Okay, also, with the pledge, this is where sort of some cleaning stuff comes in. You can use this safely on the body and the keys of your instrument. It's fine on all finishes I've found. It's never hurt or ruined any finish that I've worked on, and I've worked on all sorts of finishes. So it's really nice on lacquered instruments. You can detail your horn with Q-tips again and pledge, and you can get into all those nooks and crannies and get off the dust and the spit and all their debris that might be on there. So, and same, someone asked me about silver plated horns before the clinic, and the pledge works to clean off silver. It even can remove some tarnish. It doesn't get it all, but it can help to get some of the heavy tarnish off. If you do have a silver instrument, you can try to detail it that way. Also, using a silver polishing cloth is really, really nice. That's a little bit harder to get in all the nooks and crannies. But if you want to try to keep the main parts tarnish free, a silver polishing cloth is really handy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using like a paste polish or something on a Q-tip and getting in there, because that can be really messy and leave a lot of residue. It's hard to get that off without having the horn all apart. So if you do play a silver horn and you're worried about the tarnish, I recommend getting it professionally cleaned if you're not comfortable doing it yourself, at least once a year if the tarnish gets crazy. You can put anti-tarnish strips in your case, which 3M makes those. I'm sure other brands do too. And that sort of helps slow down the tarnishing process. And if you play gold, you're super lucky because gold doesn't tarnish, and it's probably not going to change much over time. It'll probably always look the same. So that's that. Let's talk about oiling your keys, which someone also asked about before the clinic. So oiling your key work, and I'm going to lay my horn this way for right now, sorry. You can certainly do this on your own. I just exercise caution and using just a minimal amount of oil, okay? If you use too much, it's going to get everywhere, and then your horn will be like an oil slick and you won't even be able to play. Your fingers will be sliding off. So I like to apply oil, key oil, with a needle tip bottle. Hopefully you can see that. and I'll talk about some more suppliers maybe at the end, but Music Medic's great because they sell a small bottle. It's even a little bit smaller than this with a needle tip that would last you a long time. I mean, you don't need a lot of this oil as just a player, okay? So don't feel like you need to buy like some big jug of oil, and don't use some random oil that you think, oh, I've got this vegan coconut oil, I'm gonna put that on my, no, don't do that. Okay, use key oil specifically for instruments. And so to oil your keys, you want to, I want to target primarily, let me set this down again. I made a little thing, but I don't think it's going to show up from my iPad. So the saxophone has two types of keys on it. It's got what I call hinge tube keys and pivot keys, okay? So the hinge tube keys are keys like the stacks. Also, the palm keys are on individual hinge tubes. The hinge tube keys are keys that they have a tube, okay, that attaches the key to the instrument. So, and through that tube is a rod. Here, this is a good example. So this is a key rod. Hopefully you can see. This key from that busher is a hinge tube key. The main part of the key here is actually a tube, and the rod goes through it, and that's how it's held onto the instrument. Like the stack keys, there's multiple keys on one long rod. So when they move, if this is the tube and this is the rod, they're always twisting and moving, and there's friction in there. Those are the keys that I primarily target with my oiling when the horn's fully assembled, okay? They're also the ones that are going to wear a lot, and they can have a lot of play between them as you play. So it's gonna be hard to see, but with the needle tip, I just reach in carefully at each connection, whether it's a key, a hinge tube key and the post, or between the individual hinge tube keys, you'll be able to see it's like just a little line where they fit together. And I put one single drop of key oil at those connections, and then I just sort of wiggle the keys back and forth, and it sucks it in via capillary action, okay? And just you doing that on your own, maybe, I never know how much you need to do. I usually guess like every few months. You don't want to overdo it, because then it will, like I said, start to sort of get all over the place. But you doing that on your own is going to keep those keys moving freely, and also help any sort of buildup in there sort of get washed out, if you will. It's generally, if it starts to get to a point where things are getting a little weird, it's probably better to take the keys off. And if you're not comfortable doing that, of course, go to your tech, and they can fully disassemble it or take part of it apart, whatever it is. The other type of key that I talked about was what I call a pivot key. So a pivot key is, grab one here. So here's a Bass B flat key off of a little cheapo horn I have for demo stuff. This whole rod here is solid brass, and on either end it's just drilled out for a screw to go into. That's what holds it on the body. So it's held on with a screw on either end between two posts, and it pivots like that. Just a note about that, the hinge tube keys, if something were to hit those tubes, there's a good chance it could get dented, and then it's not going to move, or there'd be friction on the rod when it does move. So, or if you drop your horn, or a student drops their horn, and things get bent or posts get bent, those keys may start to grind on each other or not move at all. And that can happen with all types of keys. So I don't really target oiling those because there's not really much going on. I suppose you could put a drop on either end, but it's generally, I find, not going to do a whole lot for you. You can also oil your key rollers, which tend to get really noisy. Mine are not that bad, but so to do that, it's the same thing. Each roller has a little rod that goes through it, and I just put a little drop of oil on either side, and you can roll it and sort of work it in, and that fixes it. The rollers are a little less intimidating, especially C and E flat, to take off than a bunch of keys. So you may want to just use a small screwdriver and take those rods out and pop the roller off, and then you can put a drop of oil or two on the rod and sort of work it in there. But rollers can get so noisy that they create buzzes when you play, and you can just, it can drive you nuts. So just that little drop of oil here and there every few months can really help cut down on excess noise. It's going to it helps sort of maintain the mechanics of your horn if you're not in a position to get it fully cleaned and re-oiled or take it to a tech at all. Some people don't have anyone that they can go to. So that will help. You can also oil the springs on your horn, which I also recommend for people who live in more humid environments or next to a large body of water and play outside. The springs will corrode and break over time if the horn's not taken care of properly. I've seen lots of players' horns that maybe play by the ocean a lot, and because of that, the salt water sort of eats away at things, but the springs are usually the first to go because they're just made out of steel, and they don't have a lot of protection on them. So if you feel like oiling your springs, you can. I like to use a pipe cleaner and the same key oil. I just put a few drops on the end of a pipe cleaner, blah, blah, blah. And then you run it in on whatever spring you are trying to oil. And you may see some dirt come off. That's a good sign. That means it's sort of cleaning it off. And you're also putting just a thin layer of protectant on there. It's sort of like if you wax your car, okay? A note about springs could be handy. So on the saxophone, we've got sort of two types of keys in addition to the other two types I said. But you've got the keys that are sprung open all the time, like your stack keys, and the keys that are sprung closed, like low E flats, the alternate F sharp, the side keys. The springs need to go or aim in a certain direction for those keys to stay open or closed. So the way I remember this is if a key should be sprung open, like your stack keys, the spring needs to be arced or bent toward the tone hole, okay? So if I were to take off all the keys on my alto here and look at these springs down here for the stack, they would all be aimed toward these tone holes, so they'd come in this way, okay? If a key is to be sprung closed, these springs need to be aimed away from the tone hole. So if I took off my low E flat, the spring would be going this way because the tone hole is here for E flat. So that's how I remember that. In general, the more arc on the spring, the firmer it's going to feel, and the lighter it's going to be, depending on the horn and the weight of the key. Sometimes you can only do so much with that stuff. I know there's a berry for a local university here that the low C tends to be very finicky. So if I lighten it too much when the student plays, it wants to flop closed. But if I make it too heavy, our pinky is weak and it's a berry key, it's giant, then it feels awful. So be careful if you go adjusting your spring tensions, but at least now you know which direction they should go, and you can gently lighten a spring by just sort of pushing it in the opposite direction, or if it needs to be tighter, you pull it in the opposite direction. Okay, I talked about that. If you feel more adventurous with like the oiling process, I usually recommend taking the keys off, or maybe you don't feel that adventurous, so you don't want to take off like the entire stack or something, but you can at least take off the palm keys. They're all individually attached, so they're not as intimidating. So they've got a rod that goes through them. You just unscrew that and pull it out. And I like to, if I'm just doing sort of quicker work, I just slide the rod through the key and set it to the side. But if you are re-oiling, I recommend cleaning out the tube with a pipe cleaner and wiping the rod off with a paper towel. You can see that this paper towel here is an older one, but it's got a bunch of old oil and dirt on it from rods I've wiped off recently. And you want to get off that dirt and old stuff, and then you can apply new lubricant and reinstall the key. And yeah, okay. If you need to make maybe some small regulation changes on the stack key. So regulation is a fancy word for when keys are supposed to open or close together or function together. Some people call it timing. So for instance, on the lower stack, when I press for F, you'll notice the pad above it also closes at the same time. Same for F sharp. This doesn't matter as much. But so if that's maybe not closing when one or both of these closes, you have a regulation leak, okay? If you look at your instrument on the back side, you'll see where they all connect to one another. And there's a long brass rod here that's connected to this top pad that needs to close as well. So you just want to see if you press this and this key is staying open, then perhaps the cork or material between those two keys has compressed or fallen off, and you may want to try to adjust that on your own. I just use tape a lot of times. I mean, I don't install that on someone's horn. I recommend using that if you're in a pinch and you can't get it replaced or replace a cork yourself. If it's a small leak, you can use like 1 or 2 pieces of tape built up and just slide it in between those two keys to try to fix the regulation. If the cork's fallen off, obviously you're going to need a thicker material. You could build up tape, or if you have cork or something, you can certainly use that. And that's just doing it sort of without putting a leak light in there. Of course, you could if you have one, which we can talk about a little bit. So yeah, I mean, okay, let's talk about, sorry, let's talk about some crucial regulation points and some screws that perhaps you have turned or wondered, what does that do? What happens if I turn that? Probably the biggest culprit for issues is this area of the instrument, the middle right here. And if you play a modern horn, or even a lot of vintage Selmers have the same setup, but you're going to have these 2 screws on your instrument. The top one hovers above your G sharp, okay? And the lower one hovers above your Bis B flat. So the point is to keep, well, the top one, let's talk about the top one. The G sharp, when you press that, and let's say you want to go to an F from an A flat. If that screw is correctly regulated or adjusted, then that G sharp pad will close, okay? If it's not, then it may stay open, or these pads may not close, and then you're going to have a lot of problems. It's also, as I mentioned way earlier with the key leaves, G sharp is connected to your bell keys, unless you have a certain vintage, via these little tabs on the back side of your G sharp touch. So the best example I usually have is if you're playing like a C sharp arpeggio. When I play it, I usually play G sharp with the low C sharp key because I can. And if you go down that arpeggio from here, your G sharp is open. And if I go to play the E sharp and then the low C sharp, and those don't respond, perhaps the G sharp is staying cracked open, and you'll want to, hang on. No. Sorry, did you lose me? Sorry. So if you're playing that arpeggio or something in the bell keys and they're not responding, perhaps the G sharp is cracking open and you'll want to adjust this top screw. When you make these adjustments, I usually recommend doing very small turns at a time and checking it in between every single turn. So because oftentimes it's just a small leak. It's just cracking open a small amount. I think you would notice if it's way out. So just turn it, maybe like a quarter turn, play it again and check it. Or if you have a light, you can check it that way, but I always recommend playing it as well. The thing is, if you go too far, if you screw that down too far, none of these keys are going to close anymore. And that's an even bigger issue. You'll have less notes to choose from, okay? So that's why I recommend small turns, checking it by play testing, and until it feels good to you. And again, if you want to use a leak light, you can, but I always, no matter what the light says, it matters more to me how it plays. It matters more to my customer how it plays. So just play it and see how it feels. The lower screw I mentioned controls your bis B flat or 1-in-1. That's not a fingering I personally use a lot or let my students use much, but you can check it the same way. You play a B and slowly close the F key or fourth finger, and if it works, then it's probably in good regulation, or you can gently tap the bis B flat pad like that. And if you hear any tonal difference, maybe it's leaking a little bit. Where I find personally that has a bigger effect, because I don't use that fingering a lot, is the Altissimo G fingering I use. It requires that to work that way. So if you're struggling, that's a hard note anyway, but if you're struggling with that speaking, perhaps that regulation is off and you could adjust it and boom, you're playing G's like it's nobody's business. Also, you have an adjustment screw similar. Most horns are going to have this on low B to C sharp, okay? Essentially, that is if you play a B or a B flat, low B or B flat, and accidentally press or graze the low C sharp key, this may pop open, and then your low notes don't respond anymore. So same concept, you want to just adjust it. And I like to test it by playing a low B flat and rocking my pinky back to actually touch the C sharp. I have found in my repair career that, I mean, we're all different. So certain people may, their hand size or whatever their technique, they may be more prone to bumping that and they struggle with the lower stuff. So I always adjust it for them. It's not my horn. And you just have to sort of, again, adjust and check, adjust and check. Some of you, I know, like Yamaha 62 and the Custom Z have adjustment screws on the stack keys, like back here that I was talking about and up here. They're tiny adjustment screws, but those are nice because if a cork fell off or compressed, you can just adjust that finely with a small screwdriver versus using the tape I mentioned. If you don't have those adjustment screws, then you have to use some kind of material to take up the space. Okay, as far as, I'll get to some questions here shortly. As far as maybe, a lot of times people ask me, what kind of tools should I get if I'm gonna try to do some of this on my own? I mean, screwdrivers are great to get. Obviously, these ones are very long and not super practical for someone who's on the road a lot. You don't want to be carrying around like a toolbox with your horns and stuff. So I know a lot of people get those small eyeglass screwdrivers. You know, those are fine. I usually say though, be careful and be thoughtful of which tip size you use for any given screw. So if I'm going to try to remove, let's say, this larger brace screw, not my bell brace, but the screw here that holds the brace to the body, I don't want to use this tiny, like almost needle screwdriver for this giant screw head. That just doesn't make sense. If I can avoid that, I'm going to avoid that, and I'm going to choose an appropriate size screwdriver to fit that screw. You can damage the screw head, your screwdriver, and you can be really screwed if that happens. So you want to be thoughtful with that. Also, another super handy tool to have is what's called a spring hook, okay? Or you can use a crochet needle or crochet hook, I guess. This one is from Music Medic as well. It's got on either side sort of a little thing to help pull the spring toward you, or you can push it with the other side. That's really handy, especially reaching in when a spring pops off, like within a bunch of keys. Those can be hard to get to, so that's handy to have. Of course, the oil. I like the medium viscosity. If you get a really thick oil, I mean, it will last longer, but if you have friction in the keys or something, it may actually cause things to bind up. And a really thin oil, like French horn rotor oil, is almost like water. That's going to evaporate more quickly, and also it can make a huge mess. So that's why I like the medium viscosity oil. And yeah, I mean, if you want to get a leak light, you can. I just always urge some caution with those because you can fall into the trap of always checking your horn for leaks, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even practice yet. I've just been checking for leaks. Or you find a bunch of leaks, or you think you do, and then you're really distracted by that. So you can get one and sort of investigate things, but try not to overdo it, I guess, unless you really know what you're doing and really confident with that. And yeah, I mean, the Keeley's accessories are great to help maintain your horn and take better care of it. I don't mind the powder paper stuff and that sort of stuff. So I guess because it's been an hour, I'm going to start taking questions. I'm totally fine staying. I've got nowhere to be. I was just kidding about the bowling. So I'm going to pop up here and read these in the chat. Sorry, this is a weird angle. Okay. Kirby, can you talk about moisture inside the case in general? Obviously, you can't fully get all the moisture out of your instrument, so that can be a detriment to be trapped inside your case. Yeah, good question. I think with that is hard to combat. Those anti-tarnish strips that I mentioned about with silver horns, what they really do or are meant to do is remove impurities from the air, okay, and moisture. So they're a little bit absorbent, and they're just a thin strip of paper, and they suck in all that sort of stuff. That could be one route, even with a lacquered or gold-plated horn. Again, the Key Leaves products are great because they're allowing the air to escape. I guess if this isn't practical for everyone, but if you've been playing a lot and you even swab out your horn and everything, maybe leaving the horn on a stand or open to dry, or leave the case open to dry out even more. Just trying to let as much of that moisture escape as you can. Okay, Ethan Wetzel, do certain materials work better for swabbing your horn, microfiber versus silk? I am just a big proponent of the silk swab because it tends to be really absorbent. And also, like I said, it runs through the horn and even my mouthpiece really, really easily, no fuss. I know with a lot of student models, they get that cleaning kit, and those swabs they have are like a foam thing and part of a chamois maybe, but I mean, even a chamois is it has a lot of friction. And I remember as a beginner band student, trying to pull that thing through my saxophone was really a struggle. So I know my friend Shauna Pennock mentioned that in her clinic, just like have kids throw those away and get a better swab right away. Microfiber tends to be pretty absorbent, but I feel like the silk is just a better go-to. Plus you can clean it really easily. Okay. What are your thoughts on those who leave their horns fully half assembled on a stand when it's not being played versus putting away in the case every time? I've seen a lot of people do both. I don't really have any problem with that, especially as long as you're careful. I mean, I've heard and seen lots of horns getting knocked off of stands because maybe not the owner, but their spouse or roommate or dog or whatever was careless and bumped into it and it fell over. So you have that risk already. The only thing I would say, I don't have a stand right here, but just also when you put it on there, be mindful of how it actually rests in the stand. I know some can come in close contact with like the low C sharp pad, and if you sort of quickly or carelessly put it in the stand, it could catch on that and end up throwing things out of alignment again. So I don't have any problem with it. I don't personally do that. I would rather lay it on a surface, like a high up surface, like on my workbench or something, if you're not going to put it in the case. What kind of powder? Just regular talc powder. This is the one I have is like a Teflon powder, okay? So yeah, I think talc powder would be fine. Again, with the powder thing, I know that some people are way against it, but I use very, very, very small amounts. You don't want to get carried away with that. Okay, what brand silver polishing? The one that I have, the brand is Connoisseur, which is like a jewelry polishing silver silverware polishing brand. They make other polishes and stuff. You can get them on Amazon. You can get it, I think Music Medic sells them. The nice thing about that is that it has two sides. One side's like a lighter purple, and that gets off heavier tarnish. And then the other side's a darker purple, which is more for like the final polishing. And they have chemicals embedded in them to help remove the tarnish. Oh, someone answered that, sorry. Multi-tool, spring hook, it's fluid. What do you use safely re-stick felts to the body? Good question. So, for most materials like cork and felt and other things that I glue on to a saxophone or a key, I use contact cement, okay? This is really nice because it won't ruin the surface of your instrument. It's easily removable later should you need to. And it's also really strong. In case you don't know, the way contact cement works is you glue each side of whatever it is you're trying to stick together, let it dry, and then you put it together, and then it sticks. If you put it together with both sides wet, it's never going to dry, it's never going to stick, and it'll just sort of slide around. I don't recommend using super glue in general. I use it for only specific materials in certain areas. It can be really, really messy. So yeah, I found this small jar of contact cement for traveling at like Home Depot or something. And Music Medic again sells small bottles. Okay. Yep, you can use Christmas lights as a leak light too. For a while, for some berries I bought this long string of LEDs from IKEA that I just kind of worked into a berry. That worked really well. I always thought that overnight the moisture in the instrument could freeze. Well, first of all, I hope you're not leaving your saxophone in a place that it's going to freeze. In general, if you're like traveling or your saxophone's in your car, you should take it with you no matter what. Unless you're like stopping somewhere for like 15 minutes and then you go. But don't like leave it in your car overnight, especially in the freezing cold or in your car in the hot sun all day. That's bad for it. So I don't really know about that. Peyton Clark, if you remove the keys for cleaning, what is the risk of them not seating correctly? I think it's generally pretty low risk, okay? As long as you're not aggressively like scrubbing pads and, corks and stuff don't fall off. I would say in general, things are gonna fall back into place the way they were. Again, I think the higher quality of the horn or the state of your horn, if it's in good shape and a high quality instrument, things are going to be staying the same. If you've got a lower quality horn, you're taking some risks. I just had to work on some really cheapo sax the other day for a local student, and I didn't even really want to take much of it apart because I was like, I don't want to get too far into this. So, but I think in general, you're usually okay. For most like cleanings I do, I tear the horn all apart and put it back together. And I don't think I have to do any more adjustments than I would have if I didn't tear it apart. Okay, what can be done to protect the finish on a non-lacquered horn? I can clean it with Brasso, but it will tarnish age again. Yeah, good question. With the Brasso thing, I would be really careful, first of all. It's similar to the silver polish I mentioned earlier. That can be really messy. So if you're doing that, use like very small amounts on like a Q-tip or something, and make sure you get all the excess off. I don't think you want that sitting on your horn. And also brasso tends to be, it's a little bit abrasive, I think. So just use it with caution. Um, Someone emailed me about this too just the other day. It's really, really difficult to stop that from happening at all. So again, you can try those anti-tarnish strips that are gonna help remove impurities from the air. Again, wiping it down when you're done, getting as much of the oils and moisture off of the horn to slow down that, what's that called? Patina process, okay? But at the end of the day, it's gonna be really, really hard to totally stop that from happening. Yeah. Will Peak. What? Okay, should a player invest in a screw board and nicer screwdrivers if they want to take their horn apart? Yeah, I mean, let me show you in case you don't know what Will is talking about. Um, so you don't have to get this specific one. Sorry that I sound like a music medic baby, but I sort of am. So this screw board from Music Medic has every key and more that you may not even have on your horn labeled nicely. It's got a place for each rod, the rollers here. You can also get a pivot screw board if you want to take all of those out. I mean, if I like having those, obviously, for my shop, but if I'm tearing a horn totally apart and doing like a really thorough cleaning, this is really nice because then I don't have to worry about taking the rod out of this key and then setting it aside. And you can put all your rods and screws in this, keep it organized, and then as long as you know which key is which, when you go back to it, all of your rods are in place. I mentioned earlier, if you take off like just the palm keys, you can leave the rod in the tube. Which is fine, I think. But if you took the rods out and set them all to the side, they're all going to look the same to you, and they may be slightly different lengths. And then when you put your horn back together, one may go way far in and one might stick way out. So this is a really nice tool to have. The screwdrivers, yeah, I mean, get nicer ones if you feel so inclined. I've got these, which are not like, I wouldn't say anything fancy, and I've only broken one in like 5 years of having this set. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's up to you. Some screwdrivers are really expensive, as Will knows. But as I mentioned too, I know that a lot of times, problems can pop up without much notice. So if you're thinking about what can I have with me at all times in case I have an issue, I just say get those small screwdrivers because you can actually carry them with ease, and you don't have to worry about having some long screwdriver with you. Best way to clean the part of the neck. So the neck tenon, mine's over there. The neck tenon, here's the neck. So she is talking about this part, which I'm sure all of us have experienced at one time or another. This not going in with ease or not coming out with ease. Some people will be like, oh, just put some cork grease on it and that'll, make it easier. I try to stay away from that when possible. If I'm in like in a pinch, like with a student of mine or something, and it's just like really bad, I might put a little dab of cork grease. But I prefer to use the key oil and just put maybe a few drops around the tenon, and then you can work it into the receiver, and then you wipe it both sides off with a paper towel or clean cloth, to remove the oil. And usually if you're having a problem with this being sort of quirky, it's usually just dirty, and the oil will actually help clean it off. And you want to, again, clean both sides. So you want to clean the tenon and the receiver of your horn to get off any dirt or buildup that might be in there. You know, if for some reason it's really not going in well, you may need to get your neck fit properly. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, if you're tightening that receiver screw down a lot all the time on the end plug, you may be misshaping your receiver, and then it may eventually, your neck may not go in. Long blades. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Will just said if you didn't see that. Long blades and substantial handle is really important for assembly and disassembly, in my opinion, so you don't ruin screw heads. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Those small little screwdrivers are not meant for huge jobs. So if you're thinking about fully taking your horn apart, you may want to get something like this with, and again, an appropriate sized head on the screwdriver for whatever screw or rod you're targeting. Because those little ones, they're not going to be very comfortable either. Would lemon pledge work to clean the tenon? Sure, I don't see why not. Just use a little bit, and you could even spray it on a paper towel or cloth and just sort of wipe it off to clean it. Yeah. Okay. Oops. It looks like that's all the questions. Are there any other questions from anybody? Just wait a sec, I guess. Nice. I will pet Ellie for sure when she wakes up. But yeah, I mean, if you ever look, I was asked to do this. I'm not trying to get a bunch of business or something. But if you ever have a repair related question or something weird is going on with your horn, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to help troubleshoot from afar, and you know, try to help you diagnose whatever's going on from wherever I am. And yeah, or if you just have general questions about anything, I'm happy to help. And if I don't know the answer, I certainly will figure it out. But I have been doing this for like 8 years now. And I've worked on quite a lot of different horns. So I've seen a lot of stuff and experienced a lot of unique instruments. Wax to protect the non-lacquered horn. I would probably stay away from that a little. You know, I wouldn't use wax probably ever on a saxophone. Someone asked me about Renaissance wax, and they said they had done that to their unlacquered horn, but the corrosion sort of came back anyway. So I don't know. I would just try to avoid that sort of thing. Unfortunately, unlacquered is just what it is. It's gonna do its own thing. All right. Well, I think we're finished up. So again, any questions, feel free to reach out, or you can comment on the video when it gets posted on Facebook. And thank you all so much for tuning in. Hope you learned something, and hopefully you can go take better care of your sax. Just don't break anything. Thank you.